Welcome back to the Brothers Mahoney. This is Michael,
And I am James.
and today we are discussing Lux, which is the new episode of Doctor Who, second episode of Series 15, which was released earlier today, April 19th, 2025, and this was written by Russell T Davies. So James, what's the plot of this one?
The plot of this one, and this is taken directly from Disney Plus, which probably takes it from BBC One. The quest to get Belinda home leads to an abandoned movie theater in 1952 Miami, which is hiding a terrifying secret. And before we talk in detail about different aspects of this one, who are the actors of import to show up in this one, Michael?
Of course, we have Ncuti Gatwa as the Doctor, Varada Sethu returns as Belinda, and there's a few other names here that might be of import. We have a Linus Roach playing a Reginald Pye.
And what's interesting about this actor, Linus Roach, is that I actually know him quite well from a couple of random things throughout the years. And yet I didn't even recognize him. I knew he wasn't going to be British because this is taking place in Miami. Although, ironically enough, he is British. I don't know why I thought there would be a British actor playing an American, but Linus Roach is the actor who played Dr. Thomas Wayne in Batman Begins from 2005, the first of the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy. Now, we have no place to talk about it during the Doctor Who podcast, but I'm a huge Batman fan, and I really enjoy his character portrayal of Thomas in the opening of the movie, which lasts for 45 minutes for that movie?
I was going to say like 25, but it's been a while.
I'm pretty sure it's more than 25. It was a long told origin for Batman. But as it is, he just did really good in that role, and I did enjoy that a lot. And because of his performance in that role, I recognized him in Kidnapped, a 13-episode crime series from 2006. Now, this is a completely forgotten, 13 episodes. I've never seen anyone talk about it, but I watched it and I liked it. The interesting thing for the record about this, it's not like your normal, typical crime show. This is actually kind of like The Wire. The whole 13 episodes are dealing with one single case of kidnapping. And I don't know, I thought it was quite an interesting show, very different from what I was expecting. And one of the main characters here appears in all 13 episodes. He's either an FBI agent or a CIA agent. It's Linus Roach. So it's just nice seeing a completely random appearance of this guy in something when I was not expecting it at all. So if you have the time, go watch Kidnapped if you can find it somewhere. I'm not sure if it's even streaming anywhere. I think last time I looked, nothing came up. But I'm sure if you wanted, you could find it somewhere on the internet. So if you're interested, 13 episodes, take a gander. But yeah, no, it was really cool seeing him here, even if I ended up not recognizing him, which for the record, it has been 20 years since Batman Begins, so these things happen.
Yeah, and he actually reminded me a little bit, at least in the way that he held himself, of a Bill Nye character. I mean, this guy is the projectionist of what many think is a quote-unquote haunted theater, so some dedication, bruh. Last couple of characters, there's a Mr. Ringading. He's that cartoony fella that you might know from the previews. And apparently, and I didn't know this going in, or in fact, I didn't notice this even when watching, but he's voiced by Alan Carmen, who I'm not entirely sure his most well-known role is, but I know best as Nightcrawler from the second X-Men movie, which I think is among one of the best superhero movies out there.
Yeah, not only Nightcrawler, he's even shown up in Doctor Who pretty recently. He was in The Witchfinders, which, well, I'll be nice and just say The Witchfinders. He, in that episode, of course, played King James. Now, granted, I didn't really like the portrayal they went with at all. But then again, I'm not a historian. I know little of what King James is like. But I don't know, it just felt way too comedic for me personally. But I know a lot of people did like him in that role. So perhaps I'm wrong on this one. I usually seem to be in the minority of some Doctor Who opinions, so...
Well, I wasn't a big fan of the Witchfinders either, but I think it's fair to say that both of us found a lot of that time period distasteful to us. We also have, and this character isn't nearly as important as the first four, but it's just this guy named Logan who works at a diner, and he has a sort of a, I don't know, funny sort of stereotypical wimpy sort of 50s weak guy personality, I don't know. He has some character to him, though.
Yeah, I don't really know how to describe him, but I thought he was hilarious every time he was on screen. I thought this episode had a lot of feeling to it, just in general. Some parts I liked more than others. But I just enjoyed the opening where we see the Doctor and Belinda going to the diner and talk to this guy. I just enjoyed it.
Yeah, and lastly, we have the return of Anita Dobson being Mrs. Flood, who we saw in the first episode of this season as the neighbor to Belinda, and now she's a neighbor to 1953.
Or 1952, not 1953. But the point is there, and this is in fact the first time we see in this show that she can time travel. Mrs. Flood has only appeared in technically three, but I suppose first choice with the last episode that came out. Mrs. Flood first appeared in the Church on Ruby Road, of course. Then she popped up in 73 Yards, which is why it's sad that she kind of only appears in two, because in 73 Yards that was a different reality that didn't exist. But if she can time travel, now we have to wonder how much is our version of Mrs. Flood aware of the events there. It's possible it might not come up, and it probably won't. But since she can time travel, that really opens the door a bit. Of course, he appeared in the season finale of Disney Series 1, being The Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death, which I had to think about, because I don't really like either episode name. And I suppose he did technically appear as well in The Robot Revolution, which I wasn't counting in my original numbering. But yeah, so she's appeared 4 times, and it's interesting that they're really trying to make her a thing in this season, it seems, which gives me hope that they're actually really going to answer the question of who she is and what she's about.
Well, I mean, not to be negative, but if it's the last season, then of course they're going to want to try to answer the questions they can. That's a speculation on my part.
And like I said when we talked about the Robot Revolution, if it's the last season, it's the last season, and that'll be disappointing. But there's still more Doctor Who to be found, and Doctor Who will survive, and it will eventually come back to TV. But I just see no reason to worry about that. I think we should just enjoy or not enjoy what we're getting right now. But regardless, it gives me hope that they are going to answer the Mrs. Flood issue, because she only appeared in 4 episodes of the first season, and now she's already appeared in the first 2 of this one. So that's kind of interesting. And she, of course, appeared at the very end when the Doctor and Belinda were walking away, so they didn't see her. I actually thought it was a pretty funny and rather charming appearance of hers. I just think it was kind of fun. She even got in literally 1 second before the episode credits came on. She got in a one-liner with the special effects, and then the credits roll. So I don't know. I thought she was kind of fun here at the end of this, and I wasn't expecting it either. So that made it out of the battle.
Yeah, and I think James sort of alluded to this earlier, but when it comes to recent stories of Doctor Who, I think this is among one of the better ones, certainly. Like, not all the element books, but I think a lot of it does, including, I think, was generally a pretty atmospheric and engaging cold open.
Yeah, no, like I was saying earlier, I just really enjoyed the opening. The cold open lasted for 4 minutes, which seems longer in my recollection than most cold opens have lasted. But whether that feeling is true or not, it was still quite an interesting one. We were just in an old-timey movie theater, very not crowded. What did they say, 15 people?
Yeah, and since it's not counting projectionists, there we can assume 15 is the right number.
Yeah, so just 15 people. And it's kind of what you'd expect them to portray. A mother with her young son, a teenage couple just making out and ignoring the movie. And I don't know, I thought it added a nice flavor to the movie theaters, seeing these old archetypes that you might see in just anything in this era. And I especially liked when we saw the moonlight reflect into the projector. I thought that was filmed really well. Something about those very atmospheric, a very kind of mystical, magical feel in a way. Because obviously they explained it and we'll discuss it later on, but the reflection thing just worked really well for me. I just really enjoyed how it was filmed.
Yeah, and I'm happy to report that this episode opens up much the way that we were hoping it would last time, with the Doctor and Belinda further discussing, I guess, the difficulty with getting back to Belinda's time. And I have to admit, I was worried that they wouldn't do that. So I'm happy that they took like the 5 minutes and tried to go into it a little bit.
Yeah, as we were discussing last episode, we haven't had all that many scenes, it seems to me, in the TARDIS, at least in the fourth season of Gatwa's time as the Doctor. I can think of, off the top of my head, maybe just 3 times in the first season there was any significant length in the TARDIS. And it's just nice to see at the beginning of this episode the Doctor and Belinda actually talking about and discussing the problem they have just encountered. Apparently, the bound scene that the Doctor is having from the date of May 24th, 2025, which of course is the date of the season finale of this season, actually has bounced the TARDIS all the way back to 1952, which is interesting when you think about it, because it bounced him into an encounter with what the encounter was. So I wonder if that's any hint on the intention and or reason of this effect, which only just came to me, so it might just lead to nothing. But I think it's kind of interesting that it led to this. And Belinda, the Doctor, share a nice moment where the Doctor asks her about her parents, and she asks him about his people. She mentions what was the hilarious name she came up with?
What, Time Lordia or something like that?
Yeah, Time Lordia. The Doctor even said, I wish there was named that. And then he names drops Gallifrey. And it's just a nice moment. And Belinda emphasizes, please just get me home. I want to see my parents again. I have a life, basically. The Doctor has this machine that is trying his best to fish hook his way to 2025, was it?
Yeah, I think that's how they explained it. It's like a fish hook theoretically to the right date.
Yeah, something about them landing her hook in the right date, and then at the end of the episode, he mentions needing to go some places to triangulate. So I'm assuming that's, fingers crossed, going to be the, not so much setup, but the reason he's in the next few places. That he's trying to triangulate his way with this machine to get back to this state, which would in a way give the season a nice, more connected feel if they actually do stick with that, which I personally hope they do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the whole thing, bring Belinda home, does make a theoretically good storyline. It's like the, what's it, Deep Space Nova stuff back in Tom Baker's time.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good comparison to this one, if they do go this route. I'm going to guess they aren't going to, at least not showing that contraption again. Maybe the Doctor's just going to mention it. But either way, I think that'll be kind of interesting. And we can see that the Doctor really does have the curiosity as a cat. Literally, they land here, they set the machine up, everything's fine. But then the Doctor looks over and he sees chains on a movie theater door. And he's like, who does that? When I'm like, maybe it's just sat down, which it kind of was. And when the store shuts down, those doors get locked, so people don't break in. I mean, people do anyway, but hypothetically, that's what they're there for. Maybe
Who would do
there's...
that with chains?
You could use... I mean, it really would depend on the type of place that's being locked down, and more importantly, where it's being locked down in. I don't know.
That's more reference of who would do this with a suitcase, but...
No, I know it was, but
okay.
I saw no way to play after that. That was a great line, if you don't remember, from Rosa, because apparently leaving a suitcase in the middle of a warehouse, which granted, now they say that a lot of this kind of strange, but you still wouldn't say, who would do that to a suitcase if you saw that? At least I wouldn't think you would.
That ties in nicely, though, because Rosa was an episode that theoretically dealt with racial issues. I don't think it did a particularly good job, but that's not the point. Point being, this also has a handful of racial type things going on, because, like James said, the TARDIS lands in 1952 Florida, Miami to be specific, which is an apparently segregated city. So the Doctor and Belinda are both in theoretical danger from that aspect alone. And it's sort of nice. The Doctor himself even seems to at least be aware of that. And part of that might come from his recent-ish experience in Dad and Babel, but maybe he's just been around the block a bit longer. So yeah, when they first land, they get all dressed up in a sort of, I don't want to say cheesy sequence that just lasted 5 seconds, but they ran in through one door and they come out another door, like instantaneously wearing different clothing. So it was a little bit goofy.
Yeah, which I feel, did that happen in the Maestro episode?
I feel like, if not, something very close happened. But it seemed like a similarity, and that's not the only similarity this has to the Maestro. I'll warn you that right now, guys.
Yeah, no, the Maestro episode is actually referenced more than a couple of times in this one.
But yeah, once they get dressed, they come out, and Belinda sort of bemoans the fact that they're dressed up nice, and it's like what's it, like 3 a.m. or so, and that there's no one to see them. And the doctor makes a reference that 1952 might be wise because it's quite possible this is even a sundown town. I mean, I guess we don't know, does it say? But certainly the diner that they went to, they weren't supposed to be there. Although I will say, before the diner, this is one of my, I don't want to say complaints about the episode because it has little to do with the episode. It's a complaint about the doctor. See, the doctor has a chance to get Belinda back home theoretically right there. They have that thing that's supposed to fish hook them to the right day. Apparently it was charging, and he's going to try again theoretically to bring them home. He has the chance to bring Belinda home right then, but he sort of guilt trips her and convinces her to help him solve this mystery. And my thing is, can't you just get her home first and then come back and deal with this? Like, it's literally needlessly risking her life, literally against her will. So I don't think that shows the doctor in a good light whatsoever.
No, it doesn't. And actually, I saw during the episode, it reminded me a lot, and this is going to be a reference classic Who fans will probably get. It reminded me a lot of the First Doctor. When we first see the First Doctor, of course, played by William Hartnell, for the first, I would say even whole season, honestly, season of the series, he was kind of a dick. And that's not even me extrapolating. He really was just not the most pleasant person to be around. He almost killed a caveman with a rock. And in the second serial, the second story of Doctor Who, the Daleks, which of course is the introduction to the Daleks, surprise. The whole reason that the TARDIS team, Ian, Barbara, and Susan, along with the Doctor, even go to Scavo and explore the ruins of what we learn to be Skaro, the only reason that they explore the city is because the Doctor wanted to. He faked a problem with the TARDIS just to say, oh, we need to go into the city to find the spare part. And he just faked it. The TARDIS is fine. But he wanted to explore so much, he'll make up an excuse and drag people who were literally kidnapped, in the case of Barbara and Ian, into a situation that became extremely dangerous just because he was curious. And this episode just reminded me a bit of that. This is a Las Melissa's case, but I could help but feel the same thing, and perhaps they're even trying to play into that aspect, considering the robot revolution and the way that ended, where Belinda was telling the Doctor, I'm not one of your advancers, just get me home, and trying to show the Doctor has maybe some more, I don't want to say abusive, but negative sides and negative traits to him when it comes to companions. Mostly we see the good things, but in the case of Belinda, perhaps, and maybe, for example, Clara, we see some of the bad ones.
I'm not sure what he did with Ace without the health either, to be honest.
To be fair, I'm not sure what he did with Ace, considering that we haven't read any of the votes in New Advancers, but...
Well, considering what she has, like 3 or 4 different times she leaves or something like that.
At least.
So anyway, yeah, I just don't think the Doctor's choice to investigate with Belinda is that safe and or wise. Not that the Doctor is necessarily known for making the safest choices, as the girl who waited can attest to. But yeah, that was sort of disappointing. But like James said, they do have like a 5-minute sequence in a diner where they talk to the mother of one of the teenagers who went missing. And it's sort of a nice, quiet conversation. And in fact, a whole 5-minute sequence where they sort of gathered information that almost reminds me a little bit of more traditional Russell T Davies type stuff. It's sort of an almost like season 1 type thing, I feel. It just has sort of a nice classic new era vibe to it, if that makes sense.
No, actually, I quite agree. I didn't think about it in those terms, but now that you say it, it did remind me of something we'd see in maybe season 1, season 2 of the revival.
And then that leads into the Doctor going with Belinda to the theatre to try to figure this thing out, and figure it out they do. Now, Mr. Ring-a-Ding, he's an interesting lad. When the Doctor and Belinda first go to the theatre, they hear something that sounds like tap dancing, and then out pops Mr. Ring-a-Ding. I think it's pretty good special effects, at least in my view, because we have this animated character in Mr. Ring-a-Ding next to, of course, the live actionness of the Doctor and Belinda, and I think it looked consistently good throughout the episode. Mr. Ring-a-Ding first comes to introduce himself with a nice little catchy song he has, which unfortunately I have not memorized, or I would do a beautiful rendition of it, but no such luck.
Thank the gods. But Yeah, no, it was rather catchy, and it was actually played off in a funny moment where after he does this little "I Mr. Ring-a-Ding" that song, the doctor, his very first question, "Who are you?" I mean, he did just have a whole song about that,
Maybe the doctor was in too much shock to actually listen to the lyrics.
perhaps. But I mean, apparently he didn't want to refrain because then to answer the doctor's question, he just goes back into the song, and the doctor says, "No, no, no, cut, cut, cut," which is actually really interesting.
Yeah, and that's a line that I think you could theoretically miss if you're just reading the captions. I feel like a lot happened in a little bit of time. So yeah, the doctor, like Jim says, he says cut, 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 and then he sort of says to himself, "Well, who was I saying cut to?" And there's sort of like a look on his face before it gets back to the matter of hand being Mr. Ring-a-Ding. But yeah, that little line, and it may not be of any import, but it reminded me quite a bit of that one line from the Davos Code. And that line, of course, being about the non-diegetic music the Doctor thought he was hearing. So that's two references in two seasons that just come across as more, matter's not even necessarily the right word, but it's like the Doctor is more aware of the fact he might be a TV show than what he usually would be. I'm not sure what it shows, but I think it's just an interesting line that actually, when they happened, still reminded me of what you might have seen in WandaVision, if anybody watched that pretty quality Disney Plus show.
Yeah, no, it does remind me of WandaVision. Now, of course, for all the people who were thinking, hey, maybe this shows the Doctor is in a TV show, which I'm not saying is a wrong thought to have, they kind of jump to that right here and now and have a section during the episode where the Doctor comes out of the TV and he runs into some people who are fans of the Doctor Who series. And we'll discuss the scene in more detail later. They'll have to do it in a very different way than just, oh, the Doctor realizes he's in a TV show.
Yeah, I mean, whatever way they're going to do it, we have to imagine it would be theoretically interesting. Certainly, you would hope.
I would expect it to be quite epic. And from what we saw of the reality war, I mean, no matter what the answer is, the reality war does look epic. So I guess we'll see. And I'm actually looking forward to it more than I was last episode.
Are you saying that you think this episode is better than the Robot Revolution?
I guess I haven't said yet that this one beats Robot Revolution, I would say, by at least 3 points. I thought Robot Revolution was a little below average. Maybe not even a little. I would give it like a 4.5.
It's not
Maybe.
gold graded.
It's not. But this one, I would give a good solid 7.5. I don't know if it would go as high as 8, but I would give it a 7.5. And no, I thought it was an extremely solid episode. I liked it a lot more than a Robot Revolution. Easily.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that during the wrap up of our thoughts. But cutting back to Mr. Ring-a-Ding, we find out that he is actually Lux Imperator, or the God of Light. And all this comes to the fact that the Doctor made Mr. Ring-a-Ding laugh, and when he laughed, it had the same, I don't know, beat. I'm not a music guy, but it had the same little jingle sound as the giggle from the giggle. Just the same, I guess, martial type thing. And then we see the fact that there's some type of harbinger. No, I will admit that's another thing I'm slightly confused about. It seems like Lux Imperator is a quote-unquote god. To quote him, he said he is the dazzle at the heart of the pantheon. Because this guy's got some of that swag, some of that razzle-dazzle. And he said himself that he is the quote god of light. So who or what is the harbinger?
The only interpretation I have to this is maybe, and this is random, but maybe the harbinger is the character, the cartoon character Mr. Ring-a-Ding. No, it's not a real entity, but maybe it's what the light kind of latched onto. No, I'm not sure how the whole harbinger business works. I'm not sure if it's intentional or not.
Yeah, and I guess it's not that big of an issue, but it's just like one question I had during this scene. Which, on a side note, that scene did something you don't see all that often, in which it gave some actual flashbacks to the Toymega from the Giggle, the Maestro from the Davos Code, and Sutak from the two-parter last season. So yeah, it gave direct flashbacks to them, which I thought was sort of, I guess, useful if you're watching this and you may not be as familiar with some of the previous stuff.
Yeah, no, it's useful and it's also extremely interesting. And we're not going to get into a whole low dive into this pantheon, but apparently the God of Light, Lux, was aware that the Doctor had beaten the so-called god of death, Sutak. I guess if Sutak evolved into a god and people are just aware of his defeat, I know I thought that was interesting. It probably doesn't mean anything, but more than anything, that solidifies to me that whatever this season finale is going to be, it's going to involve a god. Because there's so many similarities to the Davies Code. A very random one off the top of my head, besides the ones we've already mentioned, is the film reels when they attack the Doctor are very similar to the music notes the Maestro used.
Yeah, I got the exact same thought when watching it, and that happens a little bit toward the end of the episode, but yeah, that's a very big similarity too.
And there's just so many similarities that it really does feel like the season finale if it isn't using a god. Now, granted, maybe it gets kind of old for the Doctor to run into all these gods so quickly, but again, maybe there's actually a reason for that. So I don't know. I'm very interested. This episode, I didn't like everything it did. Parts of the middle, well, the part with the Doctor coming out of the TV, I get the feeling some people are really going to love that part. It didn't work as well for me. It's one of my actually least favorite parts of the episode. But nonetheless, this was still a very strong episode, and it does make me quite interested for what's upcoming.
Yeah, and James is referencing that during the middle section, the Doctor and Belinda sort of animated, which again we saw in, I think it was initially a German trailer of Doctor Who, then they, I think, translated it last minute for the season. But yeah, just the animated Doctor and Belinda, and they sort of, I forget how they explain it, they feel enough emotion to sort of give themselves additional depth to break out of the 2D animation and become quote-unquote real again.
Yeah, I was explaining something like, it might have been a play on the idea of being two-dimensional, where the Doctor said, hey, I can't think, my brain is two-dimensional. But then Belinda starts getting feelings that, oh my god, I'll never see my parents again. Oh my god, I'll never get home again. And then she starts to become more real, which is shown as she's a little more 3D. She was 2D-dimensional, now she's a 3D figure. And then they just kind of grow that way until they actually become back to, well, reality. And yet they're still stuck in this frame of animation. And they really play for the next few minutes with the idea of them being stuck in a actual screen on a TV, on a film reel.
Yeah, and I will say that even though this might be one of my least favorite elements, sort of the episode, I will say this is, I think, easily the most creative Doctor Who has been in some time. So it's possible that maybe it didn't hit all the right notes necessarily, but in terms of creativity, this is pretty impressive for Doctor Who. So the Doctor and Belinda are trying to escape from this film reel, and they sort of try to move the film up, so, well, they're like pretty much on like a plain white background trying to move a film reel down. So it has a very, I don't even know what to say. It's like, it's very obvious that we're watching them do this. And like James says, they eventually decide, oh, hey, we can't do it that way. And they sort of push forward, quote unquote, breaking the glass of the TV. Even though I imagine most TVs don't even use glass anymore. And they come out to meet the Doctor Who fans. One of them's wearing an After Familiar scarf, the other wearing a fez. And there's a third one there. And from the way they talk, it sounds like the Doctor is just a TV show. They're talking about their favorite adventures, and they all say blink.
Yeah, they're totally basic.
Yeah, well, we got jazz people based on the favorite episodes. But to be honest, I was sort of hoping for more like a or Tomb the Cyberman or Genesis of the Daleks reference, something like that.
Yeah, maybe just an old school reference. I would have appreciated that. But I'm not surprised. Blink's generically considered one of the best episodes of the new series or the revival. Mostly, I would suspect by people who have only ever seen that one and no other episode.
Yeah, James is what we call a bit of Benjamin, but
I'm convinced Blink is overrated. And I will stand by that. And in fact, I've run into people on the Doctor Who subreddit who agree that, yeah, it is kind of overrated. But
yeah, but you can also run into people who think Rosa was a good episode, so.
Well, there's good, there's bad, and there's the ugly. So I guess that might be where that comes in. I was hoping for more classic reference myself. But they went with Blink, it's whatever. And for the record, the third fan son in this is wearing a Beep the Meep suit, which I thought was kind of cute.
And I have no idea if those have actually been produced. But hey, if they made one, they might as well make 50,000 more, am I right? Just send them out to every Doctor Who fan. It's a celebration.
That would be nice, but if it exists, I know I want one. That's all I can say about that sort.
Yeah, and it's during this portion they were playing with the idea, like I said, that the Doctor is just part of a TV show. They reference some of Belinda's dialogue earlier. It's like, oh, how do you know about my parents? Oh, you talked about it earlier on the show. They sort of give the quote-unquote obvious solution to the episode. And I think the best I can say about it is it's also just a trick by Lux. So it's not real. The Doctor is really in the TV show, at least in universe. And this whole thing was just like a trick played by Lux. So even though I didn't particularly like the scene myself, I thought the portrayal of a quote-unquote Doctor Who fan was sort of, I don't even know if stereotypical is the right word, but it's worth mentioning that this is just a trick by Lux. So it's not quote-unquote a real portrayal. And maybe one of the reasons they outside Blink was because Lux can only do so much. So I don't know. It's not one of my favorite scenes, but it's certainly innovative. And again, I think it's one of the most interesting scenes we've seen in Doctor Who since like 1965.
I don't know if I'll go that far back, certainly, but it was a very interesting scene, very meta, and that's part of why I didn't like it, because I mentioned way back when meta things don't usually do it for me, that type of storytelling. It's not a device I particularly enjoy. Some writers can pull it off better than others, but even when pulled off in a way that most people would say is done really well, it still doesn't quite work for me. It's just not something I like. So I don't know, it's just a particular quirk of mine. And that's what brought this scene down for me. But I did think it's quite interesting that it's the exact reverse of what the Doctor and Belinda are trying to be convinced of. That the fans are saying, hey, you exist in the TV, you're not real, blah, blah. But it turns out that, hypothetically, as soon as the Doctor and Ruby leave this, what turns out to be a scene, just another scene, they were already tricked once with a racist police officer, which the Doctor didn't buy for more than a second. You could see on his face that he wasn't convinced at all. It was actually rather amusing. He didn't say anything for a good 10 seconds while the whole thing was playing out. But regardless, once they switch the scene with the fans will cease existing because they are in fact not real. Although we see them at the end of the episode, commenting on the episode, and I know Russell T Davies in recent days has done his throwaway things. But I don't know, I thought that was actually, talk about creative, that was very different. And also very interesting that they somehow still exist in some form after the episode. And I'm going to take this a serious thing instead of a throwaway joke, because it wasn't the episode. So I don't know. It's a very unusual situation. I don't think we've seen anything like that in Doctor Who before, where part of the credits is actually contextually part of the episode itself in a type of story way.
And I think they even came up on TARDIS Wiki, because I think there was a discussion to whether or not they should add out the names in the credits as quote-unquote characters in universe.
Oh, I haven't seen that. There's actually a discussion about that?
Well, someone brought it up, I think, in the talk page on TARDIS Wiki. So, I mean, yeah, it's a fair point. And like I said, I think it was quite innovative. I don't necessarily like how they pulled it off. And again, it makes the whole thing harder if they want to try something like that as the actual season finale, which since they did this, I sort of doubt they're going to try, which I know has been a theory floating around. I've never exactly known how serious the theory has been. Yeah, the Doctor is, though, able to escape back to reality, can defeat Lux with the help of Reginald. And the way they sort of quote-unquote defeat Lux is actually almost Lux win, in a way. Because I'm not sure if I mentioned it, though I probably should have earlier. The whole reason Lux came into the world, and it's not clear to me if he quote-unquote came into the world or if he was quote-unquote created by this, I guess, confluence of events, but it was caught by moonlight, electricity, and reflection sort of combining together, and that sort of gave Lux the ability to quote-unquote, I guess, possess Mr. Ring-a-Ding. And the way they quote-unquote defeat him is by sort of allowing him to soak up the light and energy of the sun, which pretty much makes him immaterial, yet still present, arguably.
Well, see, my perspective is, yeah, maybe he fused with, I don't know, quote unquote, the universe, the stars, whatnot. It was more of a diffuse. I'm not sure he has any actual cognizance during his, I guess you could call it sensing. Although I have to say, the image of Mr. Ring-a-Ding over the solar system was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, and we'll have that picture up. But that's one of my favorite screen caps of the episode. Might even make the title page, be rather.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was absolutely hilarious. Like, it's this serious moment, but it just made me think of the whole job boss meme, which we can throw up.
That's one of my favorites.
No, that's what it made me think of. And then as soon as I did, I just couldn't take it seriously. But nonetheless, I just don't think he's going to remain cognizant. I don't think he's actually going to be able to do anything with it. I just don't see it really as him winning at all. Like, it might be something he wanted, but I don't think it's what he expected it to be.
Well, I mean, I guess if he wanted light and then he got all the light from the sun that he could use, I guess it sort of worked out for him either way. But
yeah, but I still get the feeling it's not perhaps what he expected. And to be fair, I'm not sure that even was his plan now that I think about it.
Well, I think he wanted the quote-unquote light passed through the Doctor's body to make him stronger, but he seemed like he was okay with the sun too, so...
Yeah, I think he was kind of, once the sun hit him, almost kind of like a deer in the headlights, just kind of entranced by what was happening. And then he evolved and became incorporeal like the Time Lords are planning, so...
So the Doctor is able to defeat Lax, and the 15 people who went missing were sort of hidden in film reels, which you didn't mention, but hey, that's where they were. They came back, and we have good old Logan saying, "Is that Mr. Ring-a-Ding?"
No, he cracked me up so much. It was the perfect timing, too, to make this statement. Some of the... Well, honestly, a lot of the comedy in recent Doctor Who hasn't worked for me, but I thought this episode actually had a fair amount that worked. Not all of it, but I did quite enjoy that. I thought that was quite funny.
And this is probably the last time you mention him, so just accolades to Louis Cornet, who again played that guy. So, quality performance. Hope you can be a companion at some point. So then everything's wrapped up. People are happy. The Doctor and Belinda sort of, I guess, reconnect because they said some things that they were scared about once trying to become more dimensional. So they sort of talked to each other briefly about that. Then they had off, ideally to get Belinda home. And then we see in this crowd that's outside the theater celebrating the return of the 15. We see in the crowd a familiar face in Mrs. Flood, who, like I said earlier, is not just now Belinda's neighbor, but is now present here in 1952.
Yeah, and this is, like I said at the top, the first time we see this again actually time travel.
Assuming it's time travel. I mean, if she can just like stop out of dimensions and times, maybe she has like powers beyond quote-unquote normal time travel.
Maybe she's Bearless Manager. I think that was his name. He was a character, and my brother has seen this, but it was a while ago. He was a character who appeared at the end of the first Torchwood season, who could just tap in between times in a rather cool fashion. He has no need of a TARDIS or whatnot. He just literally powerful enough to tap between times just at a whim. If there's any type of deity in the pantheon, then hypothetically, I would assume any of them would probably be able to do something that powerful.
And of course, we have no idea why she's here. She tells the crowd to get how she phrases it, like, "Hey, watch this show," or "This is a show that's worth seeing," and then points to the TARDIS. So there's like a small crowd, and then she goes on, and it's not. I imagine most people aren't really listening to this old woman prattling on, but she says the show is a quote, limited run only. The show on to May 24th, which is, I think, quite cute. I think it's quite a nice and playful statement. That's the type of meta humor I am very much okay with.
You know, Mrs. Flood has actually grown on me because at the very beginning, when we first saw her, well, mostly the end of the episode where she winked and spoke directly to the camera, but obviously they're playing into that. And it hasn't been as widespread as I feared it was going to be, because again, we saw in the Davies Code the Doctor reacting in some ways directly to the camera. But since they're playing into it so much, Russell T Davies actually has a plan for it. Now, that's no guarantee it's going to be a gold plan or they'll like the reveal. But Mrs. Flood has grown on me a lot, and I, like I said, wasn't expecting her to be in this. I wasn't thinking, hey, Mrs. Flood might pop up at all. I was just watching to see what was going to happen, and then out of nowhere she pops up, and she was just such a joy to see. I just had a lot of fun with her character in this one. Like previously stated, I'm just quite excited to see how this season is going to end. And Mrs. Flood, if she's a big part of that, is a big reason why. She's been fun every time she's been on screen. And I just don't know where they got any adoption from, but I've been enjoying her performance in this role a lot.
Yeah, and overall, like James said, I tend to find Lux a more enjoyable episode than the Robot Revolution. And also, like James said, I don't think it's even close. In fact, I think Lux is probably better than Dad and Babel. But I don't know, I did like Dad and Babel. That was like quite a colorful episode. But I didn't always connect as well as it could have. It's hard to say. I think right now I probably like both episodes around equally, but I imagine that Lux is going to get a little more, I don't know, respect than what Dad and Babel did. And people seem to generally like that one.
Yeah, both have the pros and cons, of course. But I would actually say that I might like this one more than Dad and Babel. Because one thing for me, and obviously this is the new stage, we don't do our timeline discussions for these. But I'm very interested in law, in things from the past, between and present day. Have there been a sense of history in the media you're watching? And the fact that this tied into 3 whole other stories because of the whole pantheon, I guess you could call it a subplot at this point. To me, it gives more weight to these previous stories because they now matter more in the, you could call, tapestry of this new era. And that just made this, in return, this episode matter a little more as well. Even if I did like the part during the middle as much, there's a lot of interesting things to it. And I'm positive that when everything is finished up, that if it's done well, this episode will be a quote-unquote mythic episode. It'll be basically essential watching if you were to see the subplot of this whole Ncuti Gatwa era play out.
I also think if part of the whole solution is Mrs. Flood, technically I guess the Robot Revolution would be mythic too, since Mrs. Flood was there.
That might be mythic anyway, just because it's not known quite what Belinda's placing out of this is going to be.
Yeah, I guess that's something that is still yet to be seen. I also am quite interested, and I've always been interested in where exactly the Mrs. Flood thing is going. I've probably come to the conclusion I suspect it's Claire's mother who's just annoyed with the Doctor and wants revenge after all this time, and that's what my gut's telling me. But
no, it's the real voice.
You know what? That would be the perfect solution. Although, actually, I don't know if you thought about it, but things usually flood because of rain, and rain is an anagram of the Rani. So, let's go, it's Rani. Let's do this.
I am so tired of every mystery person being called the Rani. Now, of course, Russell T Davies, I hope he's a fanboy. That's the thing about him. And he's also kind of trolly. I mean, it's Russell T Davies for a reason. And he had the whole reference to a woman with long red nails grabbing the golden tooth from the toy maker at the end of the giggle. And for the record, I still find it hilarious if you rewatch that scene, that the angle that she's grabbing it from would literally be off the roof. I'm not sure if it was intentional or if it was just even more part of the joke, but if there's anybody who would actually bring the Rani back, there's no doubt it would be LTD. But I see no point in just hoping that Mrs. Flood is the Rani. Well, obviously, it's like I've said, I hope she's a type of god character. No, I'm not sure why that would matter as a reveal. Like, I don't know, the pantheon god of creation.
Well, I mean, she did what just stormed down the gates of heaven.
I think it was that line that made me say, hey, I'm a Mrs. Flood fanboy. Because that was a pretty dope line. And speaking of good lines, by the way, I meant to mention it earlier, but the Doctor has a similar line in this episode when talking about the whole issue of segregation and Belinda being, I'd say mortified, but really more angry about the whole discrimination and the fact that it's systematic in what the sense that segregation was, and in many ways still is. The Doctor says, I topple warlords. Sometimes I wait for people to topple warlords. Until then, I live in it and I sign. Now, the last half of that fits so well with Ncuti Gatwa, because he just has a style that I've never seen any other Doctor as. I don't know if I would say flamboyant, because he's not that flamboyant, but he certainly has more of a snazzy style than certainly any Doctors we've seen before. But nonetheless, just the whole I topple warlords, but sometimes there are way for people to topple the warlords. Well, that's convenient to say for something we know is a historical event. Like, he could have toppled the whole racism thing right then, because that doesn't get dealt with until later in a very sad Paul Rosa. Yeah, I don't know, I just quite enjoyed that line. I still think it's an excuse, but it's a good sounding excuse. yeah, on the whole, I quite like this episode. I'd pit it against that and Bob, but I'd pit it easily in the top 5 Ncuti Gatwa episodes. Probably top 4. I need to see a list of them. But this has certainly been one of the best ones. And as many times as there were references, and we've mentioned the Davos Code, it wasn't even an episode either one of us particularly liked. This episode is leagues better to me than the Davos Code. No, the Davos Code did have things that were conceptually interesting, but it's again part of the whole, I don't understand what really happened. So in 1962 was there no music? And is that just like, I don't know. I have questions about things in the episode. But this one just, as a whole, worked so much better for me as a part of the Pantheon mythos. And I really enjoyed Mr. Ring-a-Ding's performance. See, he's not going to be a favorite villain of mine, but he was interesting. And I agree that he was animated really well. And the way that they filmed it worked out pretty well. The only thing I noticed is sometimes when Mr. Ring-a-Ding was on screen on the forefront, you could tell and maybe it was aesthetic as well, it was actually intentional perhaps, but you could tell the background was a little more blurry. And I noticed that a couple of times, but on the whole, I thought it was done really well, and the episode itself was done really well. A lot of the characters worked well for me in ways that this series has it really done since pre-Chapnell, honestly.
Yeah, it's a nice breath of fresh air, especially when the Robot Revolution wasn't that good. It's nice to see that Russell T Davies still has a little bit of the old 1-2 to him. So that gives some mild additional confidence that maybe he can land this Mrs. Flood thing.
He has to be aware that there was contention with how he ended last season. He has to know that.
Oh, that's why I was sort of disappointed that Lux mentioned Sutak, because that sort of canonizes it.
It was his own season finale. It was always going to be canon, so...
Yeah, I had my fingers crossed, though.
Amusing, but nonetheless.
But yeah, no, I really like this. To me, it's easily top 4 Gatwa's toys. Only ones that come close, that come to mind would be Boom, and then Dad and Babel. Yeah, and I think those two with this one, easily the best 3. I know some people really like 73 Yards with Ask Billy as the Doctor in it, so come at me, fam. So yeah, this was, I thought, pretty good. Only 6 more episodes this season. We already know that Mrs. Flood is going to be popping up in the Intergalactic Sound Contest. And I would have to imagine she would pop up in Lucky Day, since that's a Ruby-based episode, or it seems to be like it's going to be a Ruby-based episode. So I have to imagine if Mrs. Flood would pop up there, and that's a reference that she moved or something. Should be sort of cute. Like the one place you expect to pop up, she's not there.
I mean, that would be funny. It would be hilarious if they made a home movie reference. Maybe, in fact, somebody says it to the Doctor. Oh no, Mrs. Flood, she moved. And the Doctor takes note and thinks that's interesting. That would actually be kind of a nice throw line I would really appreciate. So now, fingers crossed, that happens.
If only they had started up 5 episodes ago with the whole Beezer disappearing thing, but it's okay.
I mean, yeah, there's that. But now that I think about it, another setup which completely escaped me until I saw somebody mention on the Doctor Who subreddit that we see in the end of Empire of Death when Mrs. Flood is talking to the camera, to the audience, that she's carrying a suitcase. And next time we see her, she's moved. So I don't know if that was intentional and planned out by RTD, but I think that's actually kind of hilarious in hindsight. Yeah, but even if she doesn't appear in that one or gets that funny scene to happen, the one place I actually don't expect her to show up is what I never remember the name, the writer on the
story and the engine.
Yes, the story and the engine. Something about that name is just never sticks with me. But if there's one place she doesn't show up this season, I think it's going to be that one. I think there's a place for her in the wild. I think it's also an unlikely place, but I think there could be a place.
I was going to say, it seems unlikely based on a little bit of, I guess, the little trailer we got at the end of this one. The next one looks like a somewhat isolated, not many people type planet. So I'm not sure if she'll be there, because I feel like it might be harder for her to go unnoticed from the Doctor, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, again, maybe it'll be something at the end. Maybe she'll be calm, Missy in season 8, which was, God, season 8 was a strange time. Thinking back to when we first watched it. But nonetheless, it's unlikely. Like I said, it's the second least likely place, but I agree. The next episode looks almost like a very classic sci-fi Doctor Who episode, and I feel like we don't get too many of those right now.
Yeah, because everything's so fantasy-based in recent times.
We get smatterings of it, like with Boom
Yeah, I was
felt
gonna
very
say,
much.
Boom. I'd argue Dad and Bob was decently sci-fi-ish too. And of course, I
Yeah,
think that also got comparisons to more classic Davies times.
yeah. I mean, you could argue in some ways Space Babies. I mean, that was certainly. I mean, as much as I hated it, and I did hate it, it was more related to science fiction more than fantasy. But of course, even the Robot Revolution was more science fiction. But on the whole, it doesn't feel like it's been the same type of thing we'd see during the seasons 5 through, well, Matt Smith and Capaldi. It looked quite promising, and I haven't really thought much about the wall, but it was one of the ones I was more interested in, and now I'm looking forward to see what happens next week.
Yes, so that has been our positive thoughts, generally speaking, on Lux. Again, one of the best episodes, I think, in the last couple of seasons, among one of the best. But yeah, if you are curious for more deep takes and the thoughts, you can always reach out to us either down here below on YouTube, or we also have a Twitter at Brothers Mahoney. So please let us know what you thought about this one. Tell us what your favorite Mr. Ring-a-Ding lyric is, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, I've been James.
And this has been Michael. Brothers Mahoney, bid you adieu.